The trail. End of section. This is the movement that does the most careful work in the whole book, because it has to dismantle a picture most readers were not aware they had ever assembled. The biography you may have arrived with, Lucifer, the bright fallen angel, the rebellion in heaven before time began, the sin of pride that hurled him out of the presence, is not in any single passage of Scripture. It is a composite. 2 prophetic passages, read in a way that wrenches them out of their context, lie under most of it. The patristic writer Origen first joined them. Augustine canonized the joining for the Latin West. Jerome's translation of one of them gave the figure the name. The King James capitalized the name. Milton put it into verse. By the time the picture reached the modern English-speaking pew, no one was teaching it as a construction. It was being taught as the plain reading of Scripture. The careful thing is to untie the bow knot by knot, not to settle a polemic, but to recover what the prophets actually wrote, and to let what they did not say stay unsaid. The first passage is in Isaiah 14, and it has to be read whole. Mashal is a Hebrew word for a proverb, parable, taunt, or extended figurative speech. The verse names the target outright. The taunt that follows, every line of Isaiah 14:4-23, is directed at a particular human ruler, the king of the empire that had carried Israel into exile and was about to fall. The chapter knows what it is doing. It says so before it starts. Inside the taunt sit the famous verses 12-15. How you have fallen from heaven, O Daystar, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. The picture is dramatic, and the popular tradition has taken these verses as a description of Satan's primordial fall. Read inside the chapter, what the verses are doing is a deliberate use of an ancient Near Eastern royal hubris convention. Babylonian kings, and Assyrian kings before them, routinely described themselves with sky-eye titles and ascended to the stars language. The 5 I wills are exactly that vocabulary, applied caustically to a king whose actual end was death and Sheol. Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north, Har Moed Beyarkete Zaphon, echoes the Canaanite mythology of Mount Zaphon, the home of the gods in that culture. Isaiah is using the imperial king's own categories against him. You said in your heart is the prophet's standard formula for the boast a tyrant makes inwardly. Compare Ezekiel 28:2 of the Prince of Tyre. The chapter is not about a pre-creation event. It is about a contemporary tyrant who claimed the heights of heaven and is about to fall into Sheol. And the name, Daystar, son of dawn, the Hebrew is Helel ben Shachar. Helel means shining one, most likely a reference to the planet Venus when it appears as the morning star. Ben Shachar means son of the dawn, a Hebrew idiom for one who belongs to the morning. The phrase is a poetic epithet for a king who set himself up like the brightest thing in the pre-dawn sky and was eclipsed when the sun rose. The Hebrew Bible never uses Helel as a name for the Satan. The verse says, in essence, you who shone like the morning star are eclipsed. It is a figure of speech, in a taunt addressed by name to the king of Babylon. Walk on. Now the second passage. Ezekiel 28 has a similar structure, and the same care has to be given to the chapter as a whole. Look closer. Ezekiel 28, 2 oracles against Tyre. Ezekiel 28 contains 2 distinct oracles, both addressed to Tyre, and the chapter is explicit about the addressee. The first, verses 1-10, is to the Nagid Sor, prince of Tyre, a human ruler the prophet names by office. End of section. It opens, your heart has been proud, and you have said, I am a god. I sit in the seat of the gods in the midst of the seas. The same king's boast convention as Isaiah 14. The oracle proceeds to predict his violent death at the hands of foreigners. 28:9. The first oracle is to a human king who claimed divinity and is about to be killed by ordinary swords. It is not about a heavenly being. This is the more extravagant of the two, and it is the one the popular reading minds for the Lucifer biography. You are the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. You are an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you, you are on the holy mountain of God. The Eden language is striking. The cherub language is striking. The timeline reaches back to creation. It looks on the surface like a description of an angelic being. 2 things to hold carefully here. First, the oracle is still addressed to Tyre. The chapter's heading says so. The predicted judgment in 28:18 says so, by the multitude of your iniquities. In the unrighteousness of your trade you profaned your sanctuaries. Trade in this oracle is the same trade corruption that 28:5 and 28:16 indict throughout. The Melech Tzor is plausibly read either as a literal human king in extravagant prophetic language, an Eden image applied to a king, the way Tyre's wealth, sea trade, and pride could be cast as garden glory squandered, or as a spiritual power behind the throne of Tyre, a heavenly figure operating through the human ruler. Either reading is defensible. What is not defensible is reading it as a standalone biography of the Satan, severed from Tyre, treated as if the chapter is silent about its adversary. The chapter is not silent. The lamentation is for Tyre, however far its imagery reaches. Second, even if a behind-the-throne spiritual figure is being addressed in the second oracle, the figure is not given a name. Nothing in Ezekiel 28 says the figure is the Satan, nothing names a pre-creation rebellion, nothing identifies him with Genesis 3, or with the Isaiah 14 Hello Ben Shachar. The connection is supplied by the reader from outside. The chapter as it sits is an oracle against Tyre. Walk on. So the two passages read on their own terms give the following. Isaiah 14, a taunt explicitly directed at the king of Babylon, using A&E Royal Hubris Convention, with the Hello Ben Shachar epithet as a figure of speech for a king who shone like Venus and was eclipsed. Ezekiel 28, two oracles against Tyre, the first to a human prince claiming divinity, the second to the king of Tyre, and lamentation language reaching back to Eden, with the adversary remaining Tyre throughout. Neither describes a pre-creation event. The figure popular tradition has built out of these two passages is not in either passage. Now to how he came to be there in the popular tradition. Look closer. The Trail, Origen, Augustine, Jerome, Milton, the modern Pew, Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century, was the most influential Christian writer to read Isaiah 14:12-15 as a description of the Satan's pre-creation fall. The Trail can be told in different shapes. There are earlier hints in Justin Martyr and in Second Temple Jewish writers, but Origen is the figure who set the reading on solid footing for the Latin tradition. Augustine, in the 4th and 5th centuries, accepted Origen's reading and made it central. By the time Augustine writes The City of God, the Satan's pre-creation fall is treated as established teaching, supported chiefly by Isaiah 14, read backwards through the frame Origen had supplied. Then Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin in the late 4th century, the translation we now call the Vulgate, renders Hillel ben Shahar in Isaiah 14:12 with two Latin words, Lucifer, quae mane auriebaris. Jerome was not coining a proper name, he was translating a Hebrew epithet into Latin's normal vocabulary, and the proof is in his own pages. At 2 Peter 1:19, the same Jerome renders the Greek for the morning star, phosphoros, rising in your hearts, with the very same Latin word, Lucifer. There he used it of the light the Messiah brings into a believer. He plainly did not think the word was a demon's name. It was a common noun, used twice for two different shining things. But over the centuries, the Latin readers of his Bible began to read Lucifer in Isaiah as a proper name, the figure who was Lucifer. And the modern English Bible readers, Lucifer was born. Milton's Paradise Lost, 50 years later, gave the figure his narrative, the rebellion, the host of fallen angels, the war in heaven, in verse so vivid and culturally durable that most English-speaking Christians have absorbed it without ever having read Milton. By the time you reach the modern pulpit, the picture is the picture. Lucifer, the bright fallen angel, the pre-creation rebellion, the still active enemy of souls. None of it is in Isaiah 14. None of it is in Ezekiel 28. The trail runs Origen, Augustine, Vulgate, KJV, Milton, and it was almost complete by the time it reached you. And a word owed right here before the next knot, because this is where it stings. The people who assembled this were not charlatans. Origen, Augustine, Jerome, the King James translators, they were serious, careful believers trying to do something pastoral, take a real enemy seriously, and give the church a picture to stand on. They got some of the details wrong. The impulse was right. So correct the construction and keep the people. The same tradition that read two prophets backward is the tradition that handed you the gospel, the true core of the creed and the table. The error belongs to the building, not to the hearts of the builders, and not to the teachers who handed it to you in good faith. The Road says this again at its very end. It is said here too, so no one sets the book down in the gap between the wound and the healing. Walk on. And there is one more knot on the trail worth untying, because there is a claim circulating widely online that weaponizes it specifically against the very person we have been pointing to. Isaiah 14 calls Lucifer the morning star. Therefore, Yeshua and Lucifer are the same figure, or Yeshua is the Antichrist, or some related claim. Tellingly, this argument is currently a recurring move on certain corners of social media, and it has caught more than a few sincere believers off balance, because it is a thing that, said quickly, sounds like it could be a real biblical observation. It is not. The argument depends entirely on flattening every morning star reference in the canon into one figure, and the canon does no such thing. Look closer. The morning star and the messianic prophecy. The Hebrew Bible has long used star as a metaphor for a kingly figure. The verse is read across Second Temple Judaism and into the New Testament as a messianic prophecy. The Magi in Matthew 2 see a star and follow it because they understand it as the announcement of the King of the Jews. Bar Kokhba, the leader of the Second Jewish Revolt against Rome in the 130s AD, took as his honorific name Bar Kokhba, Aramaic for son of the star, because the messianic star vocabulary was the most natural language to claim the role he was claiming. The morning star image is messianic vocabulary, on the canon's own terms, long before Revelation reaches for it. When Yeshua says in Revelation 22:16, "I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star," he is using the standard messianic vocabulary of his own scriptures, saying outright what Numbers 24 had pointed at: the kingly star out of Jacob has arrived. He is not borrowing from Isaiah 14. Isaiah 14's Hallel is a figure of speech for a Babylonian king who shone briefly and was eclipsed. It is not a name, and it is not the messianic star vocabulary. The two uses of morning star imagery in the canon, the messianic and the Babylonian tyrant, are distinct, in different languages, in different contexts, doing different work. Collapsing them as the same family of move the figure in Genesis 3 made. Edit two unrelated sentences together with a single operator slipped in, and let the appearance of similarity do the rest. And as for whether Yeshua is the Antichrist, the canon writes the answer plainly enough that the question disposes of itself. 1 John 2:22, "Who is the liar but he who denies that Yeshua is the Christ?" The verse defines the Antichrist position as denying that Yeshua is the Christ. The argument that Yeshua is the Antichrist is therefore, by the canon's own definition, the Antichrist claim. Make the claim, and you'd have stepped onto the verse's own ground, the very position it names as the Antichrist position. That does not by itself end the conversation with someone pulled toward the claim by an online voice. They may need the slow walk back through Numbers 24, through Matthew 2, through Revelation 22, through what messianic star vocabulary has always meant in the canon. The verse is a fence, not a slammed door, but the fence is the verse itself, and anyone walking the claim toward Yeshua should see the fence before they take another step. Walk on. So the trail comes apart. Isaiah 14 is a taunt against the king of Babylon. Ezekiel 28 is an oracle against Tyre. Neither names the Satan, neither describes a pre-creation event. Hallel ben Shakar is a Hebrew epithet, not a name. Lucifer is a Latin common noun, not a name. The pre-creation fall biography is a composite assembled by Origen, canonized by Augustine, named by the Vulgate's translation choice, capitalized by the KJV, and given its narrative shape by Milton. The morning star vocabulary that some have used to slander Yeshua is the standard messianic vocabulary of the Hebrew Bible, in messianic use long before Revelation reaches for it. The whole picture, knot by knot, comes apart, not because we have been clever, but because the texts themselves are clear when they are read in their own settings on their own terms, without the assembled picture imported back into them. What you are left with, after the trail is untied, is the figure the previous movements have shown you: an office in a heavenly court, a creature with a voice in a garden, a permitted prowler in the in-between, a defeated apparatus moving toward an appointed end. Smaller than the picture you arrived with, in scope, larger than the picture you arrived with, in the seriousness of his function inside the limit he has given, and nowhere in the Bible called Lucifer. The road now turns to where the canon shows him meeting the one who will exhaust his function entirely, the 3 years of public ministry that lead to a cross, with the figure trying every move he has in the inventory and failing every one. End of section.